Our last speaker today is Marissa Stevens, who is the Assistant Director of the Portavood Center for the Study of Iranian World, and she also received her PhD in the Department of Near Eastern Languages and Cultures here at UCLA. She will be talking about the utilization of collective memory to legitimate Persian kingship in Egypt.
I would like to begin by thanking the board of the Melamu Project for granting the Portavood Center the opportunity to host the 14th Melamu Symposium. We are very fortunate to have so many outstanding scholars from around the world presenting their research at UCLA. I would also like to personally thank Professor Shayagan for selecting me to present at this symposium and for encouraging me to expand my studies to focus on the interconnectedness of global antiquity. In this talk, I want to address the ways in which Achaemenid kings utilized Egyptian collective memory to validate their kingship. Collective memory is the end result of a process in which personal experiences form into memories that are socially mediated and referential to a particular group to which an individual claims membership. With the passing of time, these individual memories join with others to form an objectivized culture in a process that Egyptologist Jan Osman calls the concretion of identity. Osman has developed a discussion of collective memory, as he sees it, in the archaeological and textual evidence from the ancient Near East and Egypt, and bases this discussion on the earlier works of sociologist Maurice Halbwachs. These collective experiences crystallize into a stable cultural memory shared by an entire group. This collective memory that has formed preserves stored group knowledge, reconstructs a selective version of the past, forms cultural heritage, organizes the members of the group, engenders cultural values, and promotes self-reflexivity. The kings of Egypt's 27th dynasty were able to inject themselves into the standing Egyptian political system and Egypt's collective memory by capitalizing on the existing religious narrative. Traditionally, scholars on the Achaemenid Empire have focused on political and economic policies as well as military history, but less attention has been paid to the religious policy of the Persians. What has been perceived as indifference, or at best permissiveness, on the part of the Persians regarding local religious practices, I would argue is instead a strategic willingness to tolerate and even support heterogeneous religious customs to the benefit of the Achaemenid Empire. I believe that the Egyptian example of how Persian rulers used the collective memory of the Egyptian religious customs to their advantage is a clear demonstration of formal religious policy within the Achaemenid Empire. To illustrate this point, I wish to turn to the texts of the statue of Udjahorresnet, as well as briefly provide a comparative archaeological example with the recent excavations at Mit Rahina. The texts of the naoforo Vaticano statue of Udjahorresnet focus on the religious and political activity undertaken by Udjahorresnet on behalf of Cambyses and Darius in the city of Sais. I would argue that the Persians targeted parts of the Egyptian religious system that were strategically connected to geographic areas of Egypt on which the Persians needed to exert their control more forcefully. In particular, the city of Sais was a necessary stronghold for the Persians to secure, as it was the political capital of the Egyptian 26th dynasty in control before the Persian conquest. The patron goddess of Sais was Neith. By the 26th dynasty, Neith had a secure and successful cult at Sais, and the pharaohs of the Saite period rebuilt an earlier New Kingdom temple dedicated to Neith on a truly grand scale. While poorly preserved and plundered by Sebahine diggers in need of fertile soil, a 700 to 900 long and 500 to 700 meter wide and 28 meter thick enclosure wall was first found in the 19th century and later identified as the probable enclosure for the Saite period Temple of Neith. The grand scale of such a monument speaks for itself. And this is the environment that the Persians found themselves when the 26th dynasty fell to the Achaemenid Empire. Confronted with this religious landscape, the Persians most basically had three broad options. They could choose to attempt to dismantle such a belief system, ignore it to the degree possible, or embrace it as part of their official administrative policy. Politically, reading the inscriptions of Udjahorresnet's statue reveals a deliberate policy on the part of both Cambyses and Darius to reestablish and maintain the critical Egyptian cult of Neith et Sais, thus embedding Persian dominion within the religious tradition of Egypt and making a strong administrative statement as well as proclaiming validation of their kingship. It is clear in the text of his statue that Udjahorresnet was a tool used by first Cambyses and then later Darius in order to legitimize their rule over Egypt. Udjahorresnet introduces himself in the inscriptions as an individual who first served as the commander of the royal navy under the reigns of Amasis and then Psamtik III. While initially this may seem aberrant to mention dedicated service to the defeated enemies of Cambyses, it not only provides a carefully veiled narrative of the Persian takeover of Egypt, but it also situates Cambyses within a validated line of Egyptian rulers, fresh in the collective memory of the Egyptian populace. Yes, his succession to the throne may have been unconventional by traditional hereditary standards, but by mentioning Amasis and Psamtik III, Udjahorresnet places Cambyses on equal footing as his predecessors and provides his reading audience with his approval of this Persian ruler. The historical narrative does not end there. Udjahorresnet was careful to introduce Cambyses first as a great chief of all foreign lands, not as the king of Upper and Lower Egypt, the title he used to describe both Amasis and Psamtik III. After Cambyses conquered Egypt and established himself as the political ruler, Udjahorresnet elevated his title to Great Ruler of Egypt and Great Chief of all foreign lands. These Egyptian terms of ruler and chief have historically connoted elements of foreignness and otherness in the collective memory of the Egyptians, often used to refer to enemy leaders. Cambyses did not become a true pharaoh of Egypt until Udjahorresnet provided him with an Egyptian throne name, a rite of passage for all Egyptian kings. The name that Udjahorresnet bestowed upon Cambyses was King of Upper and Lower Egypt, Mesut-Re. According to this narrative, then, it can be understood that Cambyses' control over Egypt was not complete until Udjahorresnet composed the royal titulary, providing Cambyses with his throne name. Being the offspring of Re, emphasized his legitimacy to rule via the Egyptian pantheon. This throne name also established him as a ruler within the context of the last two 26 dynasty rulers, as Amasis held the throne name of Kheneb-Ibre, joined with the heart of Re, and Psamtik III held the throne name of Ankh-Ka-Re, living Ka of Re. Indeed, all of the 26 dynasty pharaohs had a throne name that connected them with the sun god Re, but Cambyses' throne name boasts the most intimate connection to the god. While all the other pharaohs claimed to be associated with an element or particular component of the sun god, like Re's heart or Ka, only Cambyses claimed to be the offspring of Re, the son of the sun. I would argue that the deliberate choice of Mesut-Re was a statement made by Udjahorresnet on behalf of Cambyses to elevate his connection to the Egyptian pantheon in comparison to Amasis, Psamtik III, and the earlier Saite pharaohs, as being an offspring of Re clearly outranks them all. I see this as a developmental shift where, at the transition to the Persian 27th dynasty, the connection to the Egyptian pantheon became more intimate as a legitimizing strategy. This association with Re is also clearly a connection to Neith, as Neith was, particularly in the Saite religious tradition, viewed as the mother of Re. An offspring of Re was also an offspring of Neith. By proclaiming himself as the son of Re, Cambyses could exploit a connection to the mother goddess Neith. Furthermore, Neith being the center of the Egyptian state cultic practice at Sais is not a factor to be ignored. It would have been critical for the new Persian rulership in Egypt to secure the defeated dynasty's capital city. The need to safeguard the city in order to maintain control of Egypt was the political reason behind the religious motivations described in Udjahorresnet's inscriptions. Immediately after providing Cambyses with his Egyptian titulary, Udjahorresnet, quote, "Let his majesty know the greatness of Sais, that it is the seat of Neith the Great, the mother who bore Re and inaugurated birth when birth had not yet been, and the nature of the greatness of the temple of Neith, that it is heaven in its every aspect." Perhaps my interpretation here is overly cynical, but I do not see this exchange between Udjahorresnet and Cambyses resulting in the Persian king becoming so deeply inspired by religious might of Nath that he became a fervent devotee to Egyptian religious tradition. Instead, I see carefully camouflaged in Udjahorresnet's pious words the recognition for opportunity to utilize existing religious structures to the benefit of the fledgling Persian king turned pharaoh in creating a stronghold in Egypt. Cambyses would have recognized the political, economic, and militarized power, do not forget those 28-meter thick walls, of the Egyptian state temple institution at Sais. He would have realized that an easy way to create a stronghold in that capital city would be to assume his rightful role as pharaonic high priest and administer that institution as a proper king should. When Udjahorresnet petitioned Cambyses to restore the sanctity of the temple by expelling the foreigners and refugees that had taken residence inside its once purified walls following the Persian conquest, Cambyses readily agreed. With the cult to Nath thus reestablished and the temple refurbished, Cambyses could complete his religious performance by traveling to Sais for a proper Egyptian coronation. Entering the sanctuary of the temple, he prostrated himself before the statue embodiment of Neith, made the appropriate offerings to her, and was formally crowned as Egypt's pharaoh. He performed these actions, Udjahorresnet states, because this was, quote, as every king had done. Indeed, Egypt possessed a millennia-old cultural memory that validated Cambyses' actions as those appropriate of a proper Egyptian king. By participating in and perpetuating this cultural memory, a reenactment of a traditional Egyptian ritual that results in kingship sanctioned by the gods, Cambyses became part of the collective identity of Egypt, while in the same act, he annexed Egypt as part of the Achaemenid Empire. Thus, Cambyses, with his coronation performance, placed himself in an uninterrupted line of legitimated Egyptian divine kings and secured the politico-religious landscape of Egypt within the broader context of Persian dominion. Udjahorresnet later mentions his service to Darius, stating that he was sent back to Sais when it was learned that the administrative and workshop areas of the temple complex of Neith had fallen into disarray. Udjahorresnet restored all the physicians, scribes, and skilled laborers to their crafts and ensured they had the proper space, equipment, and materials to perform their services. This was done, Udjahorresnet claims, because Darius, quote, knew the worth of this guild in making live all that are sick, in making endure forever the names of all the gods, their temples, their offerings, and the conduct of their festivals. This statement in the inscriptions on Udjahorresnet's statue is a clear indication that the Persian kings realized the economic and social worth of temple spaces. Controlling religious spaces as the justified high priest was an easy way to control the social fabric of the community in which the temple operated. And this is exactly what new archaeological evidence at Mit Rahina, the ancient capital city of Memphis, has shown. Excavations led by Galena Belova, scientific director of the Center for the Study of Egyptological Studies of the Russian Academy of Sciences, have unearthed a massive defensive wall that encircles the Temple of Ptah. This structure, whose width reached 8 meters, was coated on both sides with a limestone-based plaster that averaged 5 centimeters in thickness and would have appeared dazzling white in the sun. A similar wall, also discovered encircling the 26th dynasty palace at the site. Excavated materials from the palace demonstrate that it was still used as an administrative center during the 27th dynasty. The 2 walls encircling these structures have been dated to the 27th dynasty by the excavators. While earlier white walls may have existed on the site and are as of yet unknown to the archaeologists, the presence of Persian-built white walls at Memphis is a stunning discovery. Memphis was the capital city of Egypt for much of the civilization's long history, with the earliest evidence dating back to the early dynastic period. While the actual location of the city might have shifted over the course of the millennia, the city of Memphis, wherever it stood, was always a critical city for the political unification of Egypt. One of the earliest names for this city was Inabu Heji, or White Walls. Scholars have long speculated whether the city truly featured bright white enclosure walls, or if this name possibly derived from the limestone cliffsides surrounding the larger Egyptian landscape of the region. Regardless of the actual presence or absence of white walls in Memphis during the earlier periods of Egyptian history, the Persians apparently took this name very literally. I would argue that their construction of bright white walls around the two most prominent structures of Memphis in the 27th dynasty was a clear attempt to showcase their deep cultural knowledge of Egypt and connect to the collective memory of the Egyptian people. The Persian kings were essentially promoting their legitimacy to rule Egypt by tapping into deeply held traditions in order to present themselves as familiar and understanding of Egyptian cultural practices. It is thus clear that Cambyses and later Darius, with the assistance of Udjahorresnet's religious knowledge, forged a connection to both the past kings of Egypt and deities responsible for instilling authority on the king, utilizing a well-known and accepted perspective on Egyptian kingship, familiar to those over which the Persian kings most needed to establish control. Udjahorresnet can thus be seen as a creator and a manipulator of Persian kingship in Egypt. Using his intimate knowledge of Egyptian religion, he was able to legitimize Achaemenid authority in Egypt, allowing the Persians to maintain the facade of minimal interference in local religious practices that has convinced many to this day. While excavations like those being undertaken at Mit Rahina, we are now just beginning to understand how Persian authority injected itself into a thriving Egyptian political, religious, and cultural landscape. Thank you for your time and attention.